Hello, Rebels. Welcome to the base. Steve Hilton here. Kristen Garcia Dumont with me today. And we've got a very exciting guest just waiting, ready to come on and talk to us about the recall election. It's Larry Elder. He's with us today as our special guest. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. It's really important. We have got a big few weeks coming up for this state. Lots at stake in this recall election. We need to get the word out. We need your help to do that. So make sure you subscribe. And without further ado, let's welcome our guest today. Leading candidate in the recall election, Larry Elder. So here he is, the man of the moment, Larry Elder. We'll get right to our conversation in a moment. But before we start, I just want to play this ad from the Elder campaign because it's really significant and says a lot about this race. Let's roll the tape.
Our public schools need big change. I'm Gloria Romero. I was the majority leader of Democrats in the state Senate. I believe in charter schools and school choice. So does Larry Elder, but not Gavin Newsom. He shut our public schools while he sent his kids to private school. Yes, I'm a Democrat, but the recall of Newsom is not about political party. It's about Newsom. Larry Elder for governor.
Recall Newsom. Elect Elder.
So there you are, Larry. Obviously, I would expect you to agree with your own ad, but there's a lot more to it than just thinking that's a great message. Just explain the significance of that endorsement and the substance behind it.
Well, for people who are not in California, Gloria Romero is a major figure, not just in California, but of course within the Hispanic community. She was the former majority leader in the state Senate when she was serving there. She still is a Democrat. She hasn't renounced her party. And for her to endorse me is a big deal. And it shows you the importance of the issue of school choice here in California. 80% of the kids educated in public schools in California are Black and brown. 75% of Black boys cannot read at state levels of proficiency. And those levels, Steve, are already low. Nearly a half of all third graders cannot read at state levels of proficiency. And the number one impediment to school choice is the teachers union. And that's the largest funder of my opponent and the most powerful union here in California. And the polls show that Black and brown parents, especially those living in the inner city, want school choice. They're getting the worst teachers, the worst administrators, the worst principals, and they know it.
Yes, sticking with schools for a second, Larry, let me ask you about this Temecula situation, which is a story we just heard about yesterday, and it's totally outrageous, where we've moved now to terrorizing and shaming children. And if you're not familiar with it, there were two students who, based on a religious exemption, did not wear a mask to school. This is a charter school. And in response, after being physically bullied by the teacher, the entire school was shut down. And then these children are now banned from even setting foot on campus. And so I think listeners and parents, especially Black and brown parents who believe in choice, want to know, what are you going to do to protect our kids from this kind of tyranny?
Well, it's absolutely outrageous. When I become governor, by the way, Gavin Newsom just ordered all state workers who have not been vaccinated to be tested once a week and to wear a face mask at work. Now, people in California, everybody in California who wants to get vaccinated has been able to get vaccinated. People who are poor are able to get vaccinated for free. So a whole lot of people have made the decision not to be vaccinated for a number of reasons. I'm not anti-vax because of my age category. My doctor strongly advised me to get vaccinated. But as to your specific question, the idea of ordering kids to wear face masks when the science is very iffy is absolutely outrageous. I'm not sure how much power I would have as governor to dictate what school districts should do, but I certainly have the bully pulpit, and I have the ability to explain how iffy the science is, and also the adverse consequences of wearing masks. There's a lot of doctors that feel that there are adverse health consequences for these kids to be wearing masks, especially when they're engaging in physical activity. It's absolutely outrageous. And it goes back to how this man has ignored science, shutting down the state while his own kids were enjoying in-person private education, as Gloria Romero said in that commercial, sitting up there at the French Laundry with the people who drafted the mandates, not wearing masks, not engaging in social distancing. It's outrageous.
It is outrageous.
His kids don't wear masks either.
That's right. He ordered kids to wear masks outdoors, and his own kids were at a summer camp, guess what, not wearing masks. The hypocrisy is why 1.7 million people signed the petition. Nearly a third of them or so were independents and Democrats who just voted for him just 2 years earlier. And the majority of Hispanics in this state now want him recalled, even though they overwhelmingly supported him just 2 years earlier.
That's exactly right. That's why the ad is so significant, because you got the substance there with the education issue, but it really makes that point that all this rhetoric about, kind of racist, Republican, white supremacy, Trump, recall, it's just ridiculous. I mean, it's completely ridiculous. I wanted to ask you, Larry, about something that I think you may have power over if you succeed in this, which is we're just seeing reports right now. I think it's just in the process right now in the legislature of what would be the nation's most aggressive vaccine mandate. In the legislature, they're talking about, I think it's an amendment actually to an existing bill, which would require a vaccine to be shown to enter almost any indoor venue, restaurants, bars, whatever, you name it. Would you veto such legislation if it was passed?
I certainly would. And interestingly enough, Steve, in 40 years, not a single bill that has been vetoed has been overridden by the legislature, even though several bills have in fact been vetoed by Arnold Schwarzenegger and by Jerry Brown. Turns out when you veto a bill and explain to Californians why the bill is nonsensical, lo and behold, they don't have the gumption to overturn it. So when people say, what are you going to do while dealing with a hostile legislature where 2/3 of them are Democrats, you'd be surprised at how much power you have. You have the power of the veto. You have the power of line item veto. You can declare a statewide emergency, which I'm going to do for homelessness and also for water. We're having water shortages here in California. So there's a great deal of power, but I absolutely would veto such a bill when it comes on my desk.
Yeah. And the fact that you're talking about how blue California is, I think it's bluer than Lake Tahoe, as people like to say. Democrats have been in charge for, over a decade. He's a blue governor in a blue state. And I've got to believe the White House is rolling their eyes a little bit that they got to, come all the way out to California and campaign for this guy. So, what's your take on Biden and Kamala coming out to California to save Gavin?
Kristen, you're scared to death. It's not just the idea of a blue state electing a commonsensical conservative. It's this. In the event that Dianne Feinstein resigns or becomes incapacitated, and no one has seen her for months, I'd have the power to replace her. And I'm going to replace her, of course, with a Republican. That would upset the balance in Washington, D.C., the 50-50 balance in the Senate. And they are scared to death. That's why all these people are coming out here to campaign for him. That's why Elizabeth Warren cut a commercial for Gavin Newsom. She didn't, by the way, defend his record on crime, on homelessness, on the rising cost of living, and on the fact that people are leaving California for the first time, on his forest management, on the water shortages. She just called this a Republican takeover. That's all they've got.
Exactly. And by the way, I've noticed that he stopped talking about how California's roaring back. Do you remember when he was out there constantly saying roaring? He seems to have stopped saying that now. I wonder why, Larry.
Well, he also dropped another talking point, Steve. He used to call this a takeover by white supremacists. After I got into the race, that talking point kind of went away. Although the LA Times recently called me, wait for it, the black face of white supremacy. And that's why I'm asking people to throw a little something in the tip jar and go to electelder.com, because he's been able to raise so far $50 million from the usual suspects: teachers union, public sector unions, Hollywood, big tech. He's going to outspend us meaning the recall side, by a factor of 9 to 1. So I'm going to need some help. Go to electelder.com.
I agree.
Doesn't progressive policy dictate that since you're black and he's white, he's supposed to resign and give you his spot?
Well, it doesn't work like that when you're a conservative, when you're a black conservative.
I see.
They can call you anything but a child of God. I've also been called the Black David Duke. So, that's how it rolls when you're a conservative. When you're a liberal, you're right. But when you're a conservative, all the rules go out the window.
So I just want to jump back to Kristen's point there about Biden and Kamala coming here. I mean, what are you going to have the chance to confront them directly? Will your paths cross on the campaign trail, do you think? When are they coming here? And how is it going to help? Do you think it's going to help you or Gavin Newsom?
Well, the only path I want to cross is mine with Gavin Newsom. I challenged him to a debate. Not too surprisingly, he's not responded. But I'd welcome Joe Biden coming here. His approval ratings are the lowest of his career, and Gavin Newsom is the only major public politician, as far as I know, who's congratulated Joe Biden on what he's done in Afghanistan. So I'd be interested in Biden coming here to defend Gavin Newsom's record on crime, on homelessness, on the outrageous cost of living, on the way 1/3 of all jobs have not come back because he slammed down the state. I'd be interested in hearing how Joe Biden's going to defend him. I'd be interested in hearing how Gavin Newsom is going to defend Joe Biden. It's going to be very entertaining. If it weren't
so just on Joe Biden, if you're the governor in a few weeks, which is looking a very real possibility. That's why they are so terrified and frantic and throwing out all this ridiculous dirt. You're going to be instantly catapulted into being one of the leaders of the Republican Party nationwide. And so I did want to just get your thoughts on, you mentioned Afghanistan, and I've been very, critical is a mild word compared to, in terms of what I've had to say about Biden and this complete disaster that he's created in Afghanistan. And we're seeing just today the tragic consequences of that, and it'll get worse. There are increasing calls, Larry, for Biden to be impeached over this. Obviously, that would require a Republican majority in the House, which again is looking very likely next time in 2022, after 2022. Do you support the idea of impeaching Biden over Afghanistan?
Well, if Donald Trump can be impeached over a call to the Ukrainian president, this is far more serious. You're absolutely right. It's been a disaster. He ignored his defense apparatus and told him not to do this. And he's claiming that his allies are right behind him when I haven't heard a single ally say he's behind him. So if Donald Trump can be impeached over the alleged January 6th insurrection and over a phone call to the Ukrainian president, most certainly Joe Biden can be and should be impeached over this.
Well, that's a very strong statement, and I very much agree with you. I said the same thing myself last Sunday, and it just seems to going from bad to worse. What do you think of that role? If you're the governor and you're this, it will be a sensation politically. How will you use that position to tell a story about how the Republican Party can win in places that everybody thought their chances were written off?
Well, Steve, I think the story that I tell was the story of results. If I do something about the crime, if I do something about the rise of homelessness, if I do something about the outrageous cost of living that's causing people to leave California for the very first time. There was just a report by the Hoover Institution that says businesses are leaving at twice the rate at which they've left for the last 3 years. And these are businesses all across the board: aerospace, manufacturing, financial, and tech. They always cockily thought that tech companies would never leave. They're leaving. So if I can show improvements in all of these areas, including the improvement in the quality of education people get, that'll tell the story in and of itself. It'll show a competent conservative who uses common sense can get results, and that's going to reverberate all around the country.
Could be a historic moment. First Black governor of the state of California. That would be huge.
But by the way, that will totally enrage the Democrats. Can you imagine how furious they'd be? Just that fact alone, that the first Black governor turns out to be on the Republican side.
And Steve and Kristen, I appreciate that, but I've never suggested someone should vote for me because I'm Black, and I don't want someone to vote against me because I'm Black. I'm not running for that. I'm running because I'm Larry Elder. I've got common sense. I've been born and raised here, been writing about the issues of crime and homelessness and the cost of living for a very long period of time. Again, it's about results. If I get results, that'll tell the story.
I agree. Last question, Larry. I know you have to go. How's it been? Just in a few short weeks, you've been in the public eye a long time, but how's it different? What's it felt like to be a candidate and directly in the firing line?
It's been very interesting, Steve. I've been a politician now for 5 weeks. I never thought I'd run for office before. I ran for a fifth grade class president once, but that's about it. But I anticipated this. I anticipated that they would be pouring over everything in my social life. And by the way, I understand that the LA Times, for example, has contacted a whole bunch of my friends, male and female, all of whom have said wonderful things, but somehow that does not get printed. But I anticipated that. I'm not naive. I've been following politics, covering politicians for a very long period of time, and I anticipated everything that's happened so far. So I don't regret 1 minute of it. I really believe I've got some ideas that can make this state better, and I feel I have a moral, a spiritual, even patriotic duty to do this. That's why I'm doing it.
Well, Larry, honestly, I'm just as someone like myself, I've been around politics a long time. Just watching you, seems to me you get stronger and stronger, like by the day. And there's still another 2 weeks. So I think that this is looking very good. And we really appreciate you spending some time with us today. And good luck to you. We say good luck to all the candidates. We're not endorsing any candidate on this show, but we certainly are endorsing the recall. And we very much appreciate you being with us today. Thank you, Larry.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Kristen, when they call you the black face of white supremacy, they're pretty much out of ammo. So I'm getting stronger and stronger.
There you go. All the best. See you soon.
Thank you.
Okay, can you imagine being called a white supremacist and you're a person of color. It's so racist. It's so bigoted in and of itself to utter those words. I don't
Yes.
understand
It's
why the left
disgusting
gets
on
away. Yes. Why
on
does
so
the
many
left get
levels.
away with this?
Well, increasingly they don't. That's the first point, because you've got really strong people who are standing up to them over this. This is one of the things I think people liked about Trump. He called them out on some of this stuff, and they hated that. Same, no, obviously they're not the same at all in many respects, but there's the same attitude, very thick-skinned. I think one of the things that's really impressive about Larry Elder, he's clearly, he's absolutely he's relishing this fight, and it doesn't bother him at all, and he's standing up to it, and he's calling them out on it. So I think that increasingly they're the ones that look ludicrous, and people can see it for what it is. But on its face, as you say, it is racist because they are racist. There's another thing I just want to point out, which is the person who wrote that, in the piece to which that was the headline in the LA Times, that comment piece. I just noticed a tweet from her today, which said, I'm paraphrasing, but it was, Gavin Newsom is the most pro-Latino governor California's ever had. The people who have most to lose from the recall are Latinos, and and you just think, again, it is this total disconnection from reality. As we've made the point, I think Larry mentioned it there, the only racial group in California that is overall in favor of recall is Latinos. So it's this classic example where the Democrats and the left increasingly believe that as long as you say the right things, you send out the right messages, the right sort of virtue signal, that's all you have to do. So you can say, I'm pro-Latino, and you put, you do some sort of Latino event, and you go and you show up at the right kind of, causes or whatever. But your actual policies hurt Latinos. That doesn't matter, because it's just as long as you say the right things and are, inverted commas, pro-Latino.
Right.
But
so
if your policies hurt Latino, doesn't matter. They've been getting away with that disconnect for years and years.
So maybe California will be a message. It'll be a sign.
That's right. And finally, that's crumbling. And it's so exciting because actually the reality is catching up with them. And it doesn't matter if you say we're for social justice and we're for empowering Black people, we're for empowering Latinos. If you're not actually doing it, and you're actually making their lives worse through the failing public schools and the rising cost of living and homelessness and all the rest of it, and rising crime because of your stupid criminal justice policies. If the reality doesn't match up to the rhetoric, you're going to get found out in the end. And that's what seems to be happening right now. It's really interesting to see it happen and exciting, frankly.
I think that's right. I think Latinos, you went after our kids. So we don't care. I mean, we were the frontline workers. So we were the ones who got sick. Slow rolling the vaccine out to Latino communities. And then, you went after our children by closing these schools. And the Latino community is saying, enough, you don't get to take us for granted as a voting bloc. And you don't get to be Hillary running around with your abuela moment, or Jill Biden not even knowing how to speak Spanish. So you do some shitty mispronunciation of a word and think that that's going to get you votes. I mean, everybody knows it's so fake and phony now. And really, the LA Times should be absolutely ashamed of themselves. I mean, to have these racists masquerading as reporters writing these hit pieces. Yes, it says that Larry Elder's doing something right. It shows the desperation of Gavin Newsom. But minority leaders should be calling out the LA Times for absolutely racist rhetoric and reporting. And there's just no place for it in California. I don't think the majority of Californians are racists.
No,
and I think they're going to go to the ballot box, and they're going to reject all of this rhetoric and say, we see the state crumbling around us. It's that simple, Gavin.
Yeah,
it's about
it's
you,
practical.
and it's
That's why
only
his
about
message-
you.
And, like I said, I've done a lot of election, I've really been involved in this. I think his message is incredibly sharp and smart and to the point, and very much directed at regular people who actually aren't that interested in politics. They just want results. And I thought he was very consistently delivered all the way through that conversation. Very impressive, actually. And I just thought the way, for example, he said, we were saying, wouldn't it be, you mentioned, he'd be the first Black governor. And I said how the Democrats would hate that because, of course, they think they're the only people that can do things like that. And And he said, well, yeah, okay, but that's not the basis on which people should vote for. He was very consistent. It's about results. It's not about race. And I thought that it was a very impressive performance, frankly.
Well, and I do think actually, I know he's being very humble and saying, don't think of me as a Black leader, but we need people like him and Black leaders in the community, especially when we've got in the schools this new narrative that white people are the oppressors and Black and brown children are oppressed. The best way to counter that extremely toxic and defeating messaging is to have leaders like Larry Elder who say, you put in the work, you got the will, you can succeed and you can lead the 5th largest economy in the entire world. I mean, where California goes, the rest of the nation goes.
Yeah, it's
and
really
I think his
interesting.
message is really inspiring.
And he's doing it without in any way watering down his beliefs or his kind of conservative principles. He's not pandering. He's not, it's really interesting. He's being authentic. That's what people always like in politics. He's authentic. It's, people they've known him for years and years through the radio, and he's the same person.
That's right. And I think Latinos like, sorry, go ahead. I was gonna say, he's religious. He's one of the few candidates who's very openly religious, and that really does resonate with both the Black and brown communities.
Let's talk about a specific point of substance that I thought was interesting and see what we think of it. So we put to him 2 specific current things that he could intervene in potentially as governor. One was the this unbelievably aggressive vaccine mandate that's being pushed through the legislature right now, and he was very clear about that. He said, "I will veto that." And he can. It's a statewide thing. It's the legislature. That's on this. Did you notice on the school masks? He didn't go as far as that. He said, "I don't know what power I would have to influence school districts." What did you make of that?
Well, all right, let's do silver lining. You're always the optimist, Steve, so you inspire me to be optimistic. Okay, so the optimistic point of view is, all right, he'd veto a mandate. So he'd veto a legislative mandate.
Yes.
So great, that's a win.
That's within the Constitution. That's clear.
That's right.
I think
That's great. That's great. But I think, it's sort of the same problem we're seeing other governors having, which is, you want to return the power to the people and let the localities decide. And if the localities decide to be barbarians, what can you do? Well, the hopeful message there is you've got somebody who's a huge believer in school choice. And so parents will have the opportunity to say, I'm not sending my kid to this school that harasses and shames and bullies. I'm going to walk me and my kids and my dollars to another school that doesn't behave this way. So as long as we fight for school choice, I think that solves itself.
Well, that's yes and no. I mean, yes, in the long term, but you're not going to get that overnight as a response to the current mask mandates.
I know.
That doesn't work. So I don't know. I mean, I would say an optimistic interpretation of what he said there was, wow, he really thinks he's going to be the governor, because he's not making kind of wild commitments that he knows he can't deliver. I
think that's right. Well, I mean, and I think all polls indicate that he's probably the best chance at defeating Gavin.
I thought it was really interesting. He didn't. It was pretty kind of measured, actually. I mean, he obviously, and I, to be fair, I think that's kind of right, actually. Look at what's happening in Florida. It's not. On the first level, as you said, it's inconsistent with the. I mean, I'm the biggest advocate for decentralization. And returning power locally. Although, by the way, the ultimate decentralization of power when it comes to education is not to local school districts and school boards. It is to parents,
That's
exactly
right.
as you say. So,
That's
let's not confuse that issue. But the in Florida, there's it's getting, and Georgia, other states, where the governor is trying to mandate things at the district level. It is not going well for them.
That's right. And actually returning power to the people, where parents perceive that they have the ability to stand up to these schools. What's happening is, everybody gets really quiet because they think that there's nothing they can do. They have nowhere else to send their child. So do they want to harm their child more by, sort of stepping out, poking their head up and looking like there's somebody who's a troublemaker?
Yeah, but the problem is, the actual thing, I wonder whether the real answer here is, if I was in his position, I think if you're being really forensic about it, because the problem, look at this Temecula story that you rightly put to him, an outrageous story, and that we'll I think hopefully we'll be able to take a closer look at that in the subsequent episode. But the that's a charter school.
Yeah.
And so why is it, and it's happening in private schools and charter schools. And so the reality is that if you believe exactly as, I mean, he used the word, very, very charming word, iffy. He said the science behind a mask mandate for kids is iffy. I would say it's non-existent. But anyway, if you don't want your kids to be forced to wear masks in schools, well, if it's being imposed left, right and center, including not just the public schools, but elsewhere, where does that actually come from? And it seems to me that where that comes from is because it's not just the school districts, because charter schools are outside that remit. It's actually coming from the state public health people who are issuing this guidance. And then all the schools say, well, we have to follow the guidance because if we don't, we could get sued or whatever. So actually that's the way into this, is to change the guidance. And so...
query, why haven't any of the lawyers taken an attack of this is state mandated clothing? And since when does the state get to mandate that you wear a certain item without establishing a clear health benefit? Because that's where everything falls apart. It's trying to establish a clear benefit of the masking such that it reduces transmission, illness, or death. It completely falls apart. And we've actually seen some of the people winning on that point, that there's actually nothing that they can prove that shows that masks legitimately or materially reduce spreads in schools when schools are already at an extremely low incidence of transmission.
Yeah, well, I mean, and that there's a broader point there, which is of course that when we say masks, if you differentiate between them, most of the, whatever, 90 odd percent, maybe nearly 100% of the masks that you see people wear, that we're all forced to wear, these cloth masks or the surgical masks or whatever, are basically, ineffective. They prevent barely any of the virus, because, I mean, the science is very clear about this, that this virus is spread through aerosols, not droplets. That's why the whole social distancing is based on a completely different science, by the way, because that was for droplets that fall. I mean, now I'm going into my rant on the virus. How did this happen? Anyway.
Because it's an important rant, because our children are being tortured over it.
Yeah, well, not just everyone. So the social distancing makes no sense, because that is a measure designed to combat a different disease spread in a different manner through droplets. That typically the weight of the droplets mean that they fall within that kind of 6 feet thing. Aerosols, which is how this virus is spread, small particles that float around in the air, go much further than 6 feet. They go 30 feet. That's why, and hang around for hours. That's why the only real intervention that makes any sense is ventilation. And by the way, that's why outdoors, California has a massive advantage in because of our climate, is like the way that we should have been thinking about this all along. And so that's why the insanity of closing down outdoor dining, which Gavin Newsom did in whenever it was at the end of last year. Anyway, let's go back to the schools point and the masking in schools. The other point about the aerosols is that they get through most of the masks that we wear, these cloth masks. They're almost entirely useless. They do not stop the virus at all. As many people have pointed out, it's basically the same. If you can smell something through it, the virus can get through it. So it's just all for show.
Totally.
It doesn't stop transmission. So even if let's just give them that we need to stop transmission is good. Even if there was any evidence at all that schools were a vector for transmission, which there isn't, but let's say there was, even if kids were at risk from the disease, which they're not. I mean, Marty McCary, who I've had on my Fox show, who John Hopkins doctor, is pointing out that if you actually look at the data, there is not one single death in the whole country of a child from the virus who wasn't already severely ill for something else.
That's right.
So even if you give them all of that and say, yes, you can spread it through the schools, yes, kids can get to whatever, the cloth masks make no difference. So why are we doing it? It's so infuriating.
Right, and it's just getting worse. I mean, now we talked about it a little bit with Larry, but this AB 455 that our listeners really need to pay attention to, this is terrifying. We're going even farther. So much for Gavin saying, oh, we're not going to have vaccine passports. You bet you know what we are. Yeah. And the legislature absolutely is going to ram that through by using what was a transportation bill to, sort of do the obfuscation, the look over here, smoke and mirrors. We're going to slip this language into this bill that requires everybody to get vaccinated, requires private employers. I mean, intervening in private contracts like that and say that private employers must mandate the vaccine. I mean, it truly is the definition of tyranny. I know that word gets a little overused, but people need to really pay attention to the overreach of our legislatures and Gavin Newsom.
And by the way, this is, I mean, if I'm reading it correctly, one of the people behind this is Buffy Wicks, a Democrat in the legislature who's been held up as, I think she was in the Obama administration or something. She's long been put forward as kind of a moderate, a reasonable, moderate, kind of technocratic kind of person, not one of these crazy lefty people. She's one of behind this. I mean, what was interesting though was that that shows you the stakes in this recall election.
Right.
And Larry Elder, very clear. I will veto that.
Yeah, thank God. Because don't you think Buffy Wicks got a call from her buddies in the White House saying, go try this out. Go try to get it passed. Just like we said, just as California goes, so goes the rest of the nation. If it passes in California, you're going to see that throughout the country. And they're going to use California as the test case like they always do. So people need to protest. They need to call. They need to stand up and say enough.
And that's why the recall is so significant. And the fact that this race is so close and Larry is doing so well is really, it's of course to any just observer of politics, it's fascinating. But for those of us who live here, it's incredibly exciting and significant. Look, we'll leave it there for today. We've got some of the other candidates coming. We've got some of them booked to appear on the podcast. We're excited about that. We've got Kevin Faulkner lined up. We've got John Cox. Hopefully we get Kevin Kiley again, maybe some of the other candidates too. We're in conversations with them, so we'll see how that shapes up. I mean, Larry Elder's clearly the front runner. Great conversation with him today. But I just think that, 2 weeks away, this could really, I think the pace of the energy behind the recall is going to get even stronger, especially if you throw into the mix this chaos that's going on with the Biden regime in Washington, that it just feels like everything is crumbling. Do you know what I mean? And I just think that
totally
in
agree.
a weird way, psychologically, it's all kind of feeling like the Democrats got a house of cards, whatever analogy you want to use is kind of falling down. Anyway, we want to give it a push on this show. So make sure you subscribe to this podcast on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure you subscribe. Get all those great interviews that are coming up with the candidates, all our analysis, all our very smart people who can tell us about all the issues. Subscribe on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. Leave us a review and do come back again for the next episode of California Rebel Base.